What's the worst thing that's happened at your family gathering? Grandma died sitting on the couch while we all thought she was sleeping. So we went on with dinner. We all ate, drank, and were merry until the wee hours of the morning when somebody tried to wake her up. Nobody knew what to think about the fact we partied next to Grandma's corpse for like 6 hours. Oh, I think I'd feel awful. Like maybe with time, that would heal it a bit, maybe be a little bit funny to some degree, but that's still kind of grim. This didn't happen to me, but I watched it happen and it was awful. My cousin was pregnant from a guy who she had only been dating for a few months, but he was a good guy. On Christmas Eve, she invited him to our family gathering, and when we were exchanging presents, he grabbed a small box from the tree and was 2 seconds from getting down on one knee when that uncle jokingly says, "God, I hope you're not proposing." Everyone laughs and this guy is in a half-bent knee, half-standing pose and just looks up at that uncle and slowly powers through it and slowly gets down on one knee and proceeds to ask her if she'll marry him. She said yes, and they're engaged, but it was one of the worst 45 seconds of my life. Whoa, 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 whoa. That's the worst 45 seconds of his life. You don't get to claim that. And honestly, good for that guy for being able to power through it. I don't exactly agree with people getting married after a few months, but they do them. Thanksgiving about 1985, family gathering at my parents' home. Mom, dad, brother, sister, grandmas, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc., all watching football. Cousin picks up the remote to mess with the volume but turns on the VCR on accident. Full-blown smut fills the screen. Dad leaps, grabs the remote and fumbles frantically to turn it off. Bible thumper brother and sister-in-law snatch up their kids and leave. Cousin says, "Boy, that sudden death can really get intense." My stepmom never got along with her sister-in-law, brother's wife. They got into a fist fight one Thanksgiving at my grandparents' house. Grandma got mad and called the police. My dad was a police officer at the time. Guess who showed up to arrest his wife and sister-in-law? I mean, if I were a policeman and one of my relatives' addresses came up on the dispatch radio or whatever, I'd also be like, nope, this is on me. I'm taking care of it. Great-grandma's funeral in Arkansas. I have some distant third cousin named Stormy. Again, this is in Arkansas. And we're all gathered around the grave, and as the preacher starts to lead us in prayer, you hear this awful noise. Everyone turns to look, and there is Stormy, swinging an armadillo around his head by the tail. One of my other cousins got him to put the armadillo down so we could finish the service, but I don't recall ever having seen him at another family gathering since then. Yes, Stormy is male. He was about 19 at the time. Yes, the armadillo was alive. Apparently it had a nest or was taking a nap. I don't know what armadillos do in their spare time. Under a nearby bush, sounded kind of like a cat rejecting the advances of an unwanted lover. To quote Hank Hill, that boy ain't right. My grandmother tried to self-delete herself in the front yard because my mother wouldn't let me and my siblings, 6, 4, and 2, ride sitting on the back hood of my uncle's classic convertible during their neighborhood 4th of July parade. She was angry that no one would be able to see our outfits if we were seated inside the car, and while trying to delete herself, accidentally grazed my grandpa in the process. Good times. That is certainly what I would call an unnecessary escalation. Oh, I have one. This happened like a week ago at a little get-together of my family at my house. My brother-in-law and his wife got into a huge argument about their new baby's medical care. The little one had a terrible case of psoriasis, and he blamed his wife for not staying on top of it, causing it to bleed. During this shouting match, Bill declared that if he was going to be raising some other man's baby, he was going to be calling the goddamn shots from then on. They have been married for 10 years and have 2 other girls. We were all so mortified we left my house. 10 other people got into cars and went to the park. This was my husband's brother and his wife, by the way. Man literally said, "I'm not the stepfather, I'm the father that stepped up, and I'm gonna be..." And I don't think many men would openly declare, "This child ain't mine, but by God, I'm gonna do this right." Proposed to my girlfriend at my birthday party and she said no, then told me she had been cheating on me. This was post-cake. They always stick around for cake, mate. During Christmas, with the family, we discovered the hard way that my little sister, who was 3 years old, was prone to cerebral seizures. Everyone was freaking out while my little sister was blue and foaming at the mouth. Aunts, uncles, and dads start arguing over my grandfather's possessions after his passing in his house after his funeral. Lots of yelling, pushing, get the F outs that day. Eventually pulled my dad out of the house in an effort to save the family. They never recovered. My uncle passed away without ever speaking with my dad again, and the others speak a bit to each other, but we haven't had any family events. It's been 3 years. Christmas at my auntie's house with my whole extended family on my dad's side, and their pets. In particular, these 2 dogs, one of which was very fond of the other, and this dog decided he wanted to have his way with the smaller, uninterested dog. Long story short, the large dog busted a nut all over the kitchen floor, leaving a huge mess that we had to clean up before eating our dinner. That is a bad dog. That is a very, very bad dog. Thanksgiving back in 1998. I was 8 years old and my wealthy grandparents decided to take the whole family to Maui for the week. This included our 5-person family and around 15 extended family members. All was great until Thanksgiving dinner. My older cousins started bickering, which turned into a pretty big altercation and some food throwing. 8-year-old me is loving it until the uncles get involved. My 18-year-old male cousin, who was a total butt wipe, starts freaking out at my 15-year-old female cousin, calling her a harlot for reasons unbeknownst to me. At this point, female cousin's dad comes flying over and punches his nephew so hard that he is literally thrown a few feet and is nearly knocked out. Now, the other uncle has to defend his son, which results in a few punches between those two until my family can separate them. There will never be a better Thanksgiving dinner, and my grandparents will never take us anywhere again. We gathered at my grandma's house where my mom and all her sisters had been raised. My oldest aunt had done a bunch of dodgy stuff to glom all the estate, and the sisters had come in full force with their husbands and kids to try and talk sense into her. It did not work. They should have lawyered up, but this was the 60s. Hell, I don't know why they were all so weak. All of us cousins had been kicked out while the grown-ups argued. I was just a little kid, and I went to get a glass of water. She had put locks on the cupboards. Mean aunt came in and slapped me across the face so hard I was staggered. I did not get water. One of my older cousins found me crying and took me to town, riding on his shoulders part of the way to buy me a soda at the drugstore and a few toys. Many years later, my mom told me mean aunt most likely poisoned grandma, and it seems true. What you have there, my friend, is a classic Disney evil aunt. I'm picturing the lady from the goddamn Rescuers, you know, the one with the red hair and the crocodiles. That's the kind of lady that sounds like. My mother-in-law's boyfriend randomly out of nowhere just says, "In case anyone was wondering, I'm against gay marriage." My mother-in-law, to her credit, looks at him and just said, "Did anyone ask?" It was an awkward couple of minutes. My alcoholic uncle got so drunk at his own daughter's wedding that he urinated on the wedding cake in front of half the wedding party. He quit drinking after that. Relatives showing off their weird-looking baby and people trying not to say anything awful about it. Being one of the first to greet them and thus having no warning, all I could come up with was, "Oh, that's a baby." I guess no blood was spilled, but I felt like dirt afterwards. I once, without thinking, just openly said that I thought it was weird that people hang up pictures of ultrasounds in front of my friend who was doing just that, and I got a lot of words thrown at me. Luckily, I missed this Christmas cause me and my mom and dad were at Disneyland. My great-grandma had a dog. Can't recall what it was, but it was super small since before I was born. Well, one Christmas, everyone is eating in the kitchen with a clear view of the dog in the backyard. In the middle of Christmas dinner, a big Doberman comes into the backyard and rips the little dog's throat out. Kind of ruined Christmas. Kind of ruined Christmas? I think that's the understatement of the century. My grandmother threw her prosthetic breast at me. I was watching the American football game during Thanksgiving while my relatives, mostly female, were sitting at the table within view of the living room. Suddenly I hear, "Hey, name," and as I turn to look in that direction, this blob comes at me and I reactively catch it. They start laughing and I realize that I'm holding my grandma's prosthetic pillow. Never has a breast been rejected by my hands so quickly. We had a huge family dinner at a very fancy restaurant. My great-aunt decided to move a very fancy pot of flowers with some peacock feathers stuck in it out of the way. In this case, out of the way meant right above the candles. It turns out the peacock feathers burn incredibly fast and produces a lot of smoke. The whole restaurant had to be evacuated. To be honest, it wasn't really that bad. The dinner had been incredibly boring. 14-year-old me certainly thought the fire made things a lot more interesting. This one day we woke up in a relative's house after a gathering night. We found the morning water tasted weird, so my cousin and host checked the water tank. The rat was floating there. Everyone in his house headed to the hospital instantly. I'd be doing the same thing. Well, we have a family reunion annually in Virginia for some distant relatives on my mom's side. No one in my immediate family has attended until about 7 years ago when my mother started driving my grandma to the reunion. Dad says that we could make it a family trip, but Mom brushed the idea off. My parents divorced 5 years ago, and the next year my mom somehow cons me into attending the reunion with her and her new boyfriend. Everyone at the reunion already knew her boyfriend. Turns out she had been taking him up to our family reunion for the last few years with my grandma. I'm starting to believe my grandma never cared for my dad all that much. My grandma was staying over with us at my parents' house on Christmas Eve. The evening went great and everyone was happy. Right as everyone's going to bed, my grandma starts throwing up in her bed, saying she feels horrible, but she doesn't want us to call an ambulance because she doesn't want to trouble anyone on Christmas Eve. She's like the epitome of a sweet old lady. My parents call an ambulance anyway, and good thing because it turns out she was having a heart attack. She lived, ended up having a quadruple bypass, followed by a full recovery, our Christmas miracle. She's still alive and kicking and still smart as a whip. I miss my grandmother. Introduced to a distant cousin for the first time who was a 10. She was beautiful, and I was told that she was deaf. I had never met a deaf person. We were both 15 years old. I shook her hand and said to my brother who was standing next to me, "She's a babe." She started to laugh. "I read lips," she said. Singing Sweet Home Alabama all summer long. We're celebrating an uncle's birthday and we realized about 15 minutes into it that grandma died. Everyone lost their mind because she was 75 and seemed fine 10 minutes before. Died of a massive brain aneurysm. Whole family was devastated and I still took some cake. This happened just a couple of months ago. My wife is pregnant and we were a few months in. We had gone to the doctor to find out the gender and we were throwing a family party to deliver the news. Her family is very well off and very large. I'm talking 50 people within a 5-block radius to her grandparents' house. My side of the family is super small. Just my mom, stepfather, and aunt come to the party. So I supplemented my side with some of our mutual couple friends. About an hour into the party, we had everyone go outside for the reveal. We prepared these poppers filled with confetti, either blue for male or pink for female, for the announcement. I thought it would be hilarious to make one filled with the opposite color, but my wife said no. Anyways, everyone gets a popper, lines up on either side of the driveway. 3, 2, 1. Pop! Pink glitter and confetti fly in the air. Everyone is hooting and hollering in celebration. We start receiving congratulatory remarks from my friends and her family. I made the announcement that we had come up with a name. Right after I said the name, my mother comes up to me and says, "Are you sure it's not a boy?" "Yes, I'm very sure. The doctor confirmed it last weekend." A tear starts to roll down her cheek. "And y'all are firm on the name? We really like the name we picked out. What about my middle name, Jean?" "I'll get my wife, but I think we're pretty set on the name we picked out." She left shortly after that exchange without saying goodbye. Apparently, right after the pop, she turned to my friend who had just gotten her PhD and asked how reliable those sonograms are at determining the gender of the child. She gave us the cold shoulder for the next 3 months and has a collection of boy names ready just in case 3 doctors and a handful of nurses are wrong about us having a baby girl in December. Some people just utterly hate being wrong. Christmas dinner. Grandpa picked up something at the store that wasn't what Grandma asked for. Grandma threw frozen chicken at Grandpa's head. Grandpa ducked, chicken hit glass patio door, shattering it. Police were called, children were quickly taken and driven home, and Grandma wonders why most of the family doesn't make much of an effort to stay in touch. My brother throwing a temper tantrum at age 30. It has been pretty common for him to blow up about little crap all his life. It was his youngest daughter's 2nd birthday, and he was in a really bad mood all day, even though our mum and his wife had taken care of everything. It came to a head when it was about time to do the cake. It was kind of a tall cake with a carousel on top. The dog bumped into the table and the cake shifted a little, almost knocking the carousel over. He stood up and said something like, "God damn it, your frickin' dog is ruining everything." My mom said, "Calm down, the cake is fine." He got in her face and said, "Don't tell me what to do, B-word." At that point, my brother and stepdad got up and kind of surrounded him, ready to kick his butt. After a few seconds, he finally stormed out of the house and left. I feel the need to reiterate at this point that he was 30 years old and it was his daughter's 2nd birthday. Now, I'm hardly one to make excuses for anyone's bad behavior, but it sounds like he has some undiagnosed anger issues. About 12 years ago, we were all at my uncle's house. Me, my siblings, parents, grandparents, and obviously my aunt and uncle. Grandpa was drinking some coffee with dessert when it went down the wrong pipe, and he choked up a bit. My mom, being one of the biggest overreactors I've ever known, assumes he's having another heart attack. He has a history of heart trouble, and flips the heck out. When my aunt tried to intervene and say that he wasn't having a heart attack and only coughing because of the coffee, they got into a screaming and shoving fight. Eventually, my uncle just goes, "Get the hell out of my house, get the hell out right now." 10 minutes later, we're all in a car and out of there. Up until last year, they cut off all contact with my aunt and uncle, and fairly recently, they've talked to them, added them on Facebook, invited them to events, etc. Our worst family story happened at my aunt's wedding. My aunt, a white lady, was marrying a Korean-American man whose parents really wanted him to marry a Korean woman. During their entire engagement, his parents would invite random Korean women over for dinner to try and sway him. Eventually, they seemed to get over the fact that he was definitely going to be marrying a white girl. On the wedding day, his parents seemed politely resigned to the situation. His father actually even danced with my aunt at the reception, so we were all relieved. After dancing, his father approached the mic, and we all expected him to give a toast about how my aunt was so great that he overcame his prejudice or something. Instead, he said in his thick Korean accent, "This is abomination, like German shepherd mating with poodle." My aunt ran out of the room crying, and my grandfather casually walked up and punched him in the face in front of 200 wedding guests. People cheered. I know this dude was Korean, and Khan Susanusum phone is Laotian, but I can totally imagine that happening if Bobby and Khan Jr. from King of the Hill got married. Well, it was a series of events, but it all came to a head at my grandfather's funeral. However, I'll attempt to make this as short as possible. So, a number of years back, my grandfather had a stroke. No one knew it was a stroke till 2 or 3 years later while he was refurbishing his 32 Chevy, which he treated better than his family. Eventually, he started to deteriorate and can no longer care for himself, and my grandmother can no longer do it by herself. In comes my brother, who closes down the business he just opened in order to be his full-time caregiver. I helped him as much as I could, but I lived 4 hours away at the time finishing up college. Occasionally, his brother and sister would come to visit, but for no more than 20 minutes before they had to scurry out the door for important business, all the while telling him how much they loved him. Eventually, he passed away in a peaceful manner, surrounded by my family. I'm still away at this point, and reconciles with them for all the crap he had to put them through. In comes his siblings, who, once again, shriek like banshees while mourning his death as if they had done everything to care for him. They did not. However, my grandfather said I took care of him more often than they did, and I was a full-time student who lived 4 hours away. Then comes the wake, or open casket viewing for those who may not know, where his family puts on a show for everyone to show their love in a public setting. Eventually, things slow down, and my grandmother thinks it would be nice to share our fond memories of him with those who have gathered to show their support, which we do. However, when my grandmother gets up to speak, they begin to chatter amongst themselves and abruptly leave in the middle of her speech. This was the last straw for my father, who confronted them and told them they would no longer be able to carry his casket to lay him to rest. The following day at the funeral, things went eerily smooth, although they did the whole banshee wails again for attention, but other than that, it was peaceful. Then comes the final goodbyes before we lay him down to rest. All of the sisters thought it would be great to write a joint letter to my brother and grandmother, who took care of him in his final days, and speak their minds. The gist of the letter was that they killed him, neglected him, and ignored him, which led to his death. Also included was a jab at my nephew, who was 2 at the time, stating that if my brother cared for his son like he cared for my grandfather, he would have another tinier casket to deal with in the near future. They ended the letter telling us to repent for our sins and to ask God for forgiveness unless we wish to burn in hell. We don't speak much anymore with that side of the family. Inheritance really seems to bring out the worst in families at times. Like, one time at band camp, I'm kidding, one time I went on a date with this woman who had recently inherited a fairly large property that she had plans for from her father, who left it in their name. I'm not going to name names here. And their family, all the way from like the Yemen or something, came down to England to try and like get something out of her, even though they weren't named in the will or anything like that. They had nothing to do with them for years or anything. And basically they put her through hell and in trying to like gain the property entirely for themselves, even to the point of threatening her. I was 10 and there was a family gathering at my aunt's house with a bunch of people staying over at her house. Get called into the family room and all my aunts are there looking at me. They start questioning me about my grandma's clock and whether I was playing with it, which I did, so I said yes. Turns ugly real quick, and it's an all-out argument between my mom defending me and my aunts accusing me of breaking my grandma's $5 clock. They keep grilling me about whether I broke the clock, although it wasn't broken, the batteries just fell out. Fight drags out into the night. The hosting aunt brings out other instances of how I wasn't behaving, like running my fingers through her carpet and drawing on her carpet with my finger, eventually accuses my dad of purposely breaking her sleeping bags. Me, being 10 and not understanding what this fight is actually about, feels guilty that maybe I caused this whole thing because I played with my grandma grandma's clock, and my poor mom is defending me when I might have broken my grandma's clock by playing with it. The hosting aunt eventually apologizes to my mother months later, but it made things really awkward for 10 years. Even now, things aren't really the same. Years after the whole thing, I realized it wasn't even really about me or the clock. It was about some other crap that I don't really even understand, but my aunts used me as their point of attack. I even remember me saying all of this over a clock when I was 10 during the fight, and one of my aunts insisting it was more than that, implying that it was about how I was a horrible liar or something. You can't make this stuff up. My older brother died in his sleep when he was 16, shortly before Christmas in 2005. During his funeral, my grandfather, Mom's dad, got up to speak right after my sobbing dad and said, "I'm the grandfather. I just wanted y'all to know that," and sat down. Everyone either looked confused or extremely angry. The reason why this was extra crappy was because we had never seen him until then. My mom had spoken about him in a very negative way over the years and told us he had left her and her siblings when they were young. He worked as a pimp and a substance dealer, and he had recently gotten a 25-year-old pregnant. A few months after my brother's funeral, my mom told me my uncle had been born. One of my best friends attended the funeral, and he still likes to joke about my grandfather. 2 days later, my girlfriend of 2 years cheated on me at a New Year's Eve party. I went to a family reunion in the holler of Kentucky with folks I thought I knew. It was my cousin's or great-uncle's house. I'm not too sure, and he is 80-plus years old and his family has owned this land forever. Everyone, except for my immediate family, was very close to them. So some 12-year-old girl in my family who was white brings over a black girl. Everything was fine and dandy till one of the owners saw this. He yelled at the top of his lungs, "What the F is this crap?" Insert hick name here. "Didn't build this land to have an, oh geez, on it. It ain't right." That little girl will never forget that. She had to deal with real racism right in her face, and I was so embarrassed for being a part of that family and felt that I had to apologize for being associated. We left very quickly after. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Linked in the description below.